Hey there, fans of the strange, dark, and mysterious. If you're into stories that make your skin crawl and keep you up at night, then buckle up because this one's a doozy. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? The stories. The librarian who reopened maps after one voicemail. The voicemail hit the library phone system at 9:16 in the morning, and staff noted the time on the call sheet. The town's map room had been shuttered since 2016 for budget reasons, with the keys sealed in a gray envelope. Rhea Calder was 38 and worked as a reference librarian, and she was supposed to weed duplicate travel guides. She liked lists and quiet projects that finished by closing time, and she intended to be home before the streetlights switched on. She opened the staff mailbox for routine messages, and the new voicemail had a subject line that looked wrong. The timestamp matched today, yet the voice sounded grainy and old, like cassette tape found in a hot attic. The caller sounded rushed but clear, and he used a steady dispatcher tone that carried through the static. He said the emergency detour map in the bridge packet had its north arrow wrong, and the depot road turn would strand drivers. He named 2 intersections locals would recognize, and he said the paper copy got flipped during a late-night duplication. He asked whoever heard this to check the flat files in the public map room, and then he hung up fast. Rhea paused because the library was planning a small display for the bridge reopening next week. The town crew wanted visitors to see old blueprints and printed maps, and the staff had quietly promised to unseal the room. She replayed the message and wrote down every location, and she typed the intersections into the library catalog notes. The bridge packet sat behind the desk in a manila folder, and she slipped the detour sheet out with a quiet tug. The detour looked normal at first glance, and the label fonts matched the county style guide. The north arrow pointed toward the top of the page, and a thick red line wrapped through 3 turns like a ribbon. She looked for a small staff stamp, and there it was near the border in faint purple. It said copied from firehouse drawer after warehouse incident, which the old reference notebook linked to 2009. Her job and training lived in the overlaps between paper and people, and she felt the old itch to confirm. The warehouse incident had clogged the streets for days, and archived calls reportedly mentioned bad directions at least twice. She brought the folder to the workroom and pulled the microfilm drawer, and the metal slides rasped against old paint. Dispatch logs on film listed closed streets and detours, and operators marked trouble points with pencil circles. 2 logs from the same night mentioned Depot Road, and the note said trucks turned the wrong way toward the river. One line said, "See temporary detour plate beside flat file B," which sounded like a direct breadcrumb. Flat file B waited in the locked room behind the genealogy shelves, and the envelope with the keys lived in a safe. She signed a paper acknowledging responsibility for access, and she carried the keys with both hands like a relic. The map room smelled like dust and linen, and the ceiling fan ticked from a loose blade. She slid open a drawer and found rolled sheets, and brittle plastic sleeves stuck to their neighbors like leaves after rain. The temporary detour plate was a stiff board with a taped photocopy, and someone had written "mirror warning" in grease pencil. The north arrow had a big X over it, and a second arrow pointed to the right side with the word "up." She spread the board on a table and placed washers on the corners, and the paper fought to curl back into memory. The depot road turn looked reversed compared to the packet, and the red line as drawn would lead drivers into gravel. Her phone compass showed north toward the windows, and the temporary plate matched her reading within a few degrees. The packet map disagreed by a wide margin, and her stomach tightened like it always did when details misbehaved. She printed a recent aerial photo from the county website, and she centered on Depot Road and the bridge approach. A water tower shadow ran northeast by the clock, and that matched the plate, but not the packet. She called Tomas Brink, who was 54 and ran maintenance, and she asked about the packet source. He said a volunteer scanned old map holders in the spring, and staff patched labels onto the county base. He remembered a late-night copy job at the firehouse during the warehouse week, and he thought someone flipped a master. He had no hard proof, but he told her to talk with a retired cartographer who lived near the marsh. The cartographer was named Lyda Morell, and she was 71 with careful eyes and a faded canvas jacket. Lyda said she had drawn the original emergency plates on Mylar, and she always sketched north as a small star. Lyda remembered the night the plates went missing, and she spoke like a teacher marking a board after a test. The firehouse copier worked only on the legal tray that night, and someone fed the plate upside down, then pressed copy twice. Lita said her handwriting on the board looked like her early notes, and she pointed to the grease pencil word up. She kept a photo from that week that showed 2 volunteers holding the board outside, and the sun angle matched. Rhea asked if the board ever returned to the library, and Lyda shrugged like she had told this story several times. She said yes, the board came back 2 days later, and someone tucked it into drawer B and shut the room. Rhea documented everything as if the board could grow legs and escape, and she wrote dates beside each step. She took photos of the board and the packet, and she copied the microfilm lines, and she initialed each printed page. The voicemail still bothered her, because the timestamp said today, yet the content smelled like an old headache. She checked the library phone system logs, and a vendor note explained a recent server migration for stored voicemail. An alert said a batch of delayed messages had been flushed to mailboxes, and the explanation used dry language and disclaimers. She asked the vendor to search for the caller number, and they returned an old service name with a billing code. The code matched a dispatch line used during the warehouse week, which explained the voice and the choice of words. Someone had recorded this warning years ago, and the system had kept it like a seed in a jar. Rhea asked if the caller name could be released, and the vendor sent a redacted sheet with initials and a job title. A local news archive matched the initials to a night guard who reportedly died of natural causes in his parked car. The guard had phoned the correction before the medical event, and he had tried to reach any desk that could fix the map. His message never reached a human while the roads were jammed, and the bad copy camped in a drawer. Rhea brought her notes to Tomas, and he carried the folder to a brief meeting with the town clerk. The clerk asked for confirmations and a plan, and Rhea offered a clear sequence that would be easy to retrace next year. Step 1 was to treat the packet map as untrustworthy and to replace it with a fresh export from the county base. Step 2 was to reconcile the arrow with on-site compass readings and to annotate with the date and the staff initials. Step 3 was to scan the temporary board and let the grease pencil speak and to place its image in the appendix. Step 4 was to add a small note in the bridge display and to credit anonymous archival materials for clarifying the route. Tomas drove to Depot Road with her after lunch, and they parked near a mailbox whose nameplate had peeled away. The river ran dull and brown beside the road, and a detour sign leaned like a tired person after a long shift. Rhea stood where the red line on the packet would have sent traffic, and she looked through cottonwoods at rough gravel. The correct route followed a narrow paved lane to the east, and the wrong turn aimed drivers toward a soft shoulder. A school bus rolled past on the narrow lane, and the driver waved like this was already muscle memory. The aerial photo printed in the morning matched the bus path, and the packet map did not. They stopped by a small clinic 2 turns away, and the nurse behind the counter remembered the warehouse week. The clinic took calls from stranded drivers, and a nurse reportedly walked out to redirect a line of cars at sundown. The town clerk approved the correction that afternoon, and the county uploaded a clean detour with verified arrows. Tomas signed off on new signs, and the bridge crew shrugged like this was just another Tuesday with wet concrete. Rhea asked for permission to open the map room weekly, and the clerk looked toward the budget with a careful tilt. The request had no funding yet, but the clerk liked the argument that open rooms produce fewer expensive mistakes. They agreed on a one-afternoon schedule under staff supervision, and Rhea posted a notice near the staircase. She placed the temporary board in a display case with a modest label, and she kept the packet map below it with a sticky note. The sticky note said obsolete and see corrected version, and she included the date and her initials for future sanity. A footnote in the display explained that a delayed voicemail triggered the review and no personal names appeared. At the reopening of the bridge, the mayor shook hands and cut a ribbon, and the appetizers ran out fast. Drivers moved through the new approach like water down a smooth bed, and the detour signs wandered into storage. Tomas clapped her shoulder near the coffee urn, and he said quiet fixes rarely get banners, which is the point. Lyda visited the display the next morning, and she pressed her fingers against the glass like she was reading Braille. Rhea listened to the old voicemail one more time, and the voice had that tired confidence that comes from night work. He had said, please check the flat files, and it felt like he was speaking across a hallway rather than across years. On her desk, she kept a small notebook with 3 lines that she repeated when projects became slippery. Write down names of things as they are used, compare them to how they look on paper, test the direction with the sundae. She added a 4th line in light ink to mark the lesson that felt both new and as old as maps. If a voice says the arrow is wrong, open the drawer before the parade trucks roll and the cameras arrive. In the months that followed, the room gathered quiet visitors, and the fan still ticked, but less often after tightening. Folks brought rolled plats from garages, and Rhea labeled them carefully, then scanned and returned them with fresh sleeves. A contractor volunteered 2 hours a week to help with filing, and he taught her to spot scale bars that lied. Teachers brought students to trace creeks with cotton thread, and one kid noticed a benchmark star on the courthouse steps. The bridge display came down after the season changed, and the temporary board went back into drawer B with a proper sleeve. A small typed note inside the sleeve told the story in 12 lines, with dates and initials and measured claims. It said a voicemail arrived and matched earlier dispatch references, and staff verified the arrow with compass and aerial evidence. It said a clean map replaced the packet version before the reopening, and the town's roads agreed. Rhea did not call it a miracle, and she did not call it fate, because both words would cheapen 12 careful steps. She called it library work, which sounded plain, yet it held more weight now that a ribbon had been cut. On quiet afternoons, she stood at the window where the compass had pointed, and she felt the same small pull. North was where the light made honest shapes on paper, and where a tired voice could still find the right room. When she locked the door each week, she thought about the man who made the call, and she wished he had been heard. His warning crossed an odd gap in the system, and it landed like a folded note slid under a door. In a town where stories often arrive secondhand, the plain ones sometimes carry the longest mileage. One message, one board, one arrow corrected, and a room reopened so a drawer could be opened without ceremony. The stories. Paramedic who kept one final snapshot. The story began with a photo that shouldn't have existed. A single Polaroid, slightly overexposed, showing the inside of an ambulance during a call that supposedly never happened. It was discovered years later, tucked between the pages of an old medical manual in a small-town fire station's archive. The man behind that photo was Martin Kessler, a 42-year-old paramedic who'd spent nearly 2 decades working in a quiet coastal county. He was the kind of person people trusted instantly, steady hands, calm voice, always first on scene and last to leave. Colleagues said he never forgot a face, even from calls years earlier. That photographic memory made the irony of what happened next impossible to ignore. In late March of 2012, Martin and his partner, Dana Ruiz, responded to a dispatch from a stretch of highway north of town. A rollover accident, single vehicle, one driver, reportedly conscious but trapped. The log shows they arrived at 2:17 a.m. Weather clear, visibility decent. Everything about the report was ordinary. Until it wasn't. When firefighters reached the car, there was no one inside. Seatbelt unbuckled, airbags deployed, engine still ticking from heat, no footprints in the gravel shoulder, no sign of struggle. Dana's field notes mention Martin standing there longer than anyone, staring into the dark beyond the guardrail, as if waiting for something to move. He didn't say much on the drive back. Just, it doesn't feel right. Someone was here. The next morning, Martin called the dispatcher, asking for the driver's name. There wasn't one. The system had registered the call as civilian report unknown source. No, 911 record existed, only a radio relay from a patrol unit that later denied making it. That was when Martin started keeping a notebook part medical log, part journal. He filled it with incident details that didn't make sense, addresses that didn't appear on maps, names that changed between shift reports, an emergency call from a decommissioned nursing home that had burned down 5 years earlier. Dana joked it was his ghost file, but Martin treated it like evidence. In mid-April, station archives show him requesting a portable camera from inventory, the kind still used for accident documentation. He said he wanted backups for reports. No one questioned it. That camera became the source of the one photo that remains. On May 5th, Martin responded alone to a cardiac distress call in a residential neighborhood. The official dispatch recorded a woman named Eleanor Marsh, age 71. When Dana arrived 15 minutes later, the house was empty. No patient, no signs of struggle. Only Martin, sitting on the front steps, shaking. He told her he'd just finished chest compressions, but there was no body. That evening, he turned in a sealed envelope to the station chief. Inside, a single Polaroid showing an elderly woman on a stretcher inside the ambulance. Her face pale but peaceful, IV line in her arm, heart monitor reading a steady rhythm. The timestamp on the photo matched the call, yet no hospital in the region logged a patient by that name, and the ambulance's GPS data placed it in the station lot at the time. For weeks, the department treated it as a data glitch, a wrong timestamp, maybe a mistaken upload. Martin, however, stopped taking calls entirely. He used his accumulated leave and disappeared from the rotation. Dana later said he'd started visiting the county records office, spending hours looking through missing persons reports from the 1990s onward. According to the clerk's statement, he requested files on one case repeatedly, a local woman, 71 years old, who'd vanished from her home in May of 1996. Her name, Eleanor Marsh. She'd been last seen the same week a younger Martin had begun his EMT training in that same county. What tied them together came from an old photograph Martin found in the file. It showed a group of EMT trainees standing beside a vintage ambulance. On the far left, a younger Martin smiling awkwardly. On the far right, a woman in a white nurse's uniform, Eleanor, back when she'd volunteered with the training program. Her sudden disappearance had never been solved. The case quietly closed after 3 years. The evidence stacking grew stranger. In late May, an internal audit found Martin had accessed archived radio frequencies from the old dispatch system equipment retired in 1999. He'd been trying to trace the source of that first mysterious accident call. Logs showed someone or something still transmitting on that outdated frequency once every few nights, always repeating the same brief phrase, "medic en route." By early June, Martin returned to work briefly, though he looked exhausted, his once steady hands trembling. He told Dana he thought the woman from the Polaroid had been trying to reach him for years, that all the phantom calls were echoes of old emergencies, looping through time until someone finally answered. She begged him to take time off again, but he refused. "If I stop listening," he said, "they'll stop trying to come home." The last confirmed sighting of Martin Kessler was on June 15th of that year. Surveillance footage from a rural gas station shows him fueling the ambulance alone, headlights off, before driving north toward the old highway. The timestamp reads 2:17 a.m., the exact minute of the original rollover call. 3 days later, the ambulance was found parked beside a defunct rest stop, keys still in the ignition. The driver's side door was open, the radio turned to static. In the back compartment, responders discovered a single Polaroid camera lying on the gurney. It contained one undeveloped sheet of film. That image was later processed by the state lab. It showed the inside of the ambulance, empty except for a stretcher, with 2 folded paramedic jackets placed neatly side by side. The back doors stood open, facing a foggy stretch of road. The official report labeled Martin Kessler missing, presumed deceased. No further transmissions were logged from the old frequency. The firehouse quietly retired his call sign, and the Polaroid was sealed in evidence storage, tagged simply, "Recovered from Unit 7, June 15, 2012. Years later, when new recruits asked about him, veterans would point to the framed photo on the wall, the one of Martin and Dana receiving their service award in 2010. Behind the glass, barely visible under the reflection of overhead lights, there's a faint double exposure. The outline of an ambulance interior, doors open, a stretcher waiting. At this point, the facts that remained were simple. The snapshot was real, the patient never existed, and somewhere along that forgotten highway, a paramedic might have finally answered a call meant only for him. The stories. Paramedic who kept the final snapshot from triage. The last photo on Kira Voss's work phone was never supposed to survive the software pilot. It stayed anyway after the server hiccup. Kira was 34, a city paramedic who liked quiet late calls and neat paperwork. She started that Tuesday on basic supply checks and light banter. Her goals sounded simple in her head. Finish a 10-hour shift without a single upgrade, then get home before midnight for leftover curry. The call that changed the night came from a roadside motel behind a car wash. Dispatch logged an unresponsive male, unknown age, possible overdose. She and her partner, Mateo Lark, rolled in with lights low and voices steady. Room 12 smelled like cleaner and stale heat from the wall unit. A thin man lay sideways between the bed and a chair, breathing shallow and quick. No wallet in sight. A cracked phone blinking a silent screen. Kira saw a visitor sticker stuck to his hoodie pocket. The date line was smudged, but the background color looked like a clinic pass. They bagged him for a minute to settle his breathing. A half-full paper cup sat by the sink, ice melted into a flat circle of water. Vital signs were jumpy, but not crashing. He opened his eyes once and said a short word that sounded like Riley. Then he slipped under again. They moved fast to the medical center near the river. The radio reported a separate pileup north, which meant triage would be crowded and loud. The hospital had been piloting an electronic intake tool all month. It asked for a quick face photo to match a barcode before the wristband print. The intake line was 3 deep when they arrived. A nurse pushed the cart forward, the printer chattered, everyone talked, clipped, and fast on instinct. Kira snapped the photo at the kiosk because the app flashed a warning. Upload pending, network unstable. She kept his hoodie on because he shook. The man landed in a monitored bay by the doors. A resident named Bryn Ketter called for labs and a gentle drip. The resident squinted at the chart. Kira wrote her run sheet near the sink. She noted the visitor sticker and the motel room number, and she logged the time from the wall clock. Security cut a small plastic bag from the man's waist string. The bag held a folded laundromat card, a bent key, $3, and a receipt. A second surge of ambulances flooded triage with crash patients. Yellow tags and green tags pressed into the hallway. Voices layered into a dense cloud. In the noise, someone swapped beds to clear space. The man with the hoodie slid one bay over, and a crash patient took his place under a portable lamp. Kira and Mateo finished their handoff after an hour. The man seemed stable. They cleaned the stretcher rails, signed the tablet, and walked toward the exit. The code alarm sounded from the bay they had left. Kira swiveled in the doorway and saw movement through bodies. Someone called for epinephrine with a clipped tone. She stood still without getting in the way. The team pushed and counted and charted. The monitor flattened once, then kicked back, then flatlined again while staff switched roles. Kira did not like leaving after a loss. She did what protocol allows. She tapped Mateo's arm. Then they cleared the doorway and stepped into the humid night. Back at the station, reports stacked up behind them. An hour later, an internal message flagged her run. The patient from the motel did not make it. The summary blamed an unknown allergy aggravated by a blood pressure medication. It suggested the crew had no information at scene and that intake documentation was incomplete. Kira read that line twice. She remembered scratching on his left palm, faint letters smudged by sweat and cleaner. She also remembered the sticker on the hoodie pocket. She opened her notes app and zoomed on a quick photo of the motel nightstand. A corner of the visitor sticker showed a logo like a lighthouse beacon. Her phone buzzed again with a request from quality assurance. Please confirm the scene contained no allergy indications. Please confirm no wallet or tags were found. Kira typed careful answers. She wrote that the scene had no formal bracelet, but there was writing on skin and a clinic sticker with a date line. She could hear Mateo in the next room telling a joke about stale granola bars. She closed her eyes, pictured the kiosk light, and remembered the app freeze. She opened the work app and saw the pending icon. The photo from triage had sat in the queue since that busy hour. It should have deleted itself. She saved a copy to the secure folder because the pilots sometimes ate evidence. Officers who handle accident scenes had warned crews to keep their own digital trail. In the photo, the man stared past the kiosk, eyes unfocused, mouth clenched. The shot was crisp enough to read small print on the edge of his hoodie. She leaned toward the phone and read the visitor sticker again. The shape matched a clinic 2 miles north. The color matched last week's series on their site. She noticed something else that bothered her. The wristband in the photo was already on his right wrist, and the printed name was not Riley or unknown. The name read Colin Hart with a birth year that was wrong by 2 decades. The band also carried a room assignment for a different wing upstairs. Kira checked the run sheet and confirmed the time on the photo. It was taken before he left intake, with a clock in the frame above the desk. She balanced possibilities in her head. Either the band printer reused a label by accident, or Triage grabbed a band intended for someone from the crash. She called the station supervisor and spoke in a flat voice. She also saved the app log and the photo metadata. She wanted a clean chain if asked. The supervisor told her to hold steady. He said quality would reach out by morning and that she should write her memory within the next hour. Kira wrote about the motel room, the visitor sticker, the palm writing, and the switch between bays during the crash surge. She avoided guesses and listed times. By sunrise, the hospital asked to speak with her. A comm coordinator named Lauren Pike scheduled a meeting in a small office near the loading dock. Loren listened without interruption while Kira laid out the sequence. He wrote down the kiosk freeze, the wrong name on the band, and the sticker details. "Do you have the photo?" he asked plainly. Kira nodded once and slid her phone forward. Loren studied the image like a puzzle that did not want solving. He asked for permission to copy the file into their incident folder. Kira agreed and asked for a printed receipt of transfer. Lauren printed one with a timestamp. Later that day, security pulled camera clips around intake and the hallway. Audio is thin in those clips, but timestamps line up with dispatch logs from that hour. A volunteer recalled bumping the band cart while pushing crash supplies. The cart carried 2 stacks from different printers. A stack fell and another stack landed on top. A nurse remembered seeing a resident hand off a half-printed band to clear paper jams. Everyone meant well, and the hallway demanded corners get rounded to save seconds. The wrong band landed on the wrong wrist during the shuffle. The allergy field below the name read none, and the medication plan followed that value at speed. The palm writing found in the photo said lisinopril with a shaky loop on the L. That writing matched a pharmacy warning card found later in the discarded bag. The path to his name was still unsolved. The wrong band had masked his identity, and the motel room registry carried a fake first name paid in cash. Kira and Mateo stopped by the motel between calls and spoke to the clerk. The clerk remembered the man because he had asked for late checkout and offered a 10. The clerk described a quiet talker with a careful way of folding receipts. He said the man asked if the clinic across the highway took walk-ins on Sundays. Kira asked if he had left anything behind. The clerk pulled a small envelope from under the counter and handed it over. Inside was a second laundromat card. The card carried the same punched pattern as the one from his bag. A faded stamp showed a cartoon lighthouse that matched the clinic logo from the sticker. Kira wrote the clinic name into her notes and searched internal contacts for a social worker who knew someone there. Network rules can sometimes solve what computers cannot. By evening, a social worker faxed a staff list with a first name that matched the word Riley from the ambulance. A receptionist there recalled a cousin who visited often. The cousin lived near the rail tracks and had shared rides with a man named Rail Hinton. That name pulled a match from the clinic immunization folder with a phone number. The number reached a sister on the 3rd ring. She had been calling hospitals all day without luck. She cried once, then steadied, and asked for straight answers. Kira gave the sister the number for Loren and the case coordinator. She explained that the hospital would confirm identity through records, and that she would share what she could. The sister described Rael as a careful man who wrote allergy reminders on his hand while saving for new glasses. She said he kept every receipt because he lost a wallet once. She also said he used visitor stickers as bookmarks. He picked them from clinic bowls like candy, because ink on paper made him feel less small. The hospital identified him formally by evening, using clinic records and a dental chart from an old file. The visitor sticker linked the timeline to a specific morning. The report shifted. Instead of blaming a vague, unknown allergy, the document focused on a band cart process and a printer override protocol during surge conditions. Quality assurance asked to keep Kira's photo, which showed the wrong band before bedside orders fired. Her pending upload had turned into an anchor for the timeline. Loren thanked her in a quiet hallway near the vending machines. He said the photo mattered because it caught a small truth at the exact right second. He also said the hospital planned a training session with a new rule. Wristbands would be applied only after a complete scan and a spoken name confirmation. Kira asked about the visitor sticker and the laundromat card. Lauren said the family had seen those items and that they were grateful for the detail and care. There was a final meeting about the phrase kept photo because the tool policy warned against storing faces. Lauren documented the server failure and the pending icon. He wrote that the photo had been preserved to support timely reporting during a pilot outage. He signed the form with a date and left a copy in her file. Mateo teased her gently about her habit of triple-saving things. He said she was a walking archive with a neat ponytail and an allergic reaction to loose ends. She laughed, then stood quiet for a breath. She thought about the palm writing and how small a warning can look when a hallway feels crowded. Weeks later, a new kiosk arrived with better network checks. The printer trays carried bold labels, and volunteers learned to stop and verify whenever carts bumped. Kira kept a printed run sheet from that night in her desk. The sheet had her small notes about the lighthouse sticker and the ice in the cup. An instructor asked her to teach one class for new hires. She told them about the photo and the band, and the way tiny signals can vanish under noise. A student asked how she remembered so much. She said she wrote on index cards, and she made little recordings after calls while the radio was still warm. The sister sent a letter with a simple line. "Thank you for noticing the sticker." It made the phone call shorter, and it made the goodbye kinder. Kira folded the letter into the run sheet and closed the drawer. She washed her coffee cup, then walked outside to breathe the late shift air. The city sounded like a distant fan that needed oil. She wondered how many small warnings slide past each night because nobody has a free hand to catch them. She knew the photo would fade into policy and training slides. She also knew that a single clear frame can hold a hallway steady when clocks feel slippery. On quiet nights, she drives past the motel on her way home. The neon still flickers, and the car wash still hums across the frozen curb. She thinks about the visitor sticker and the lighthouse logo. She thinks about the wrong name on a band and the right name in a folder miles away. She is not someone who keeps trophies from hard calls. She kept that one photo long enough to send it to the right folder with a receipt. The fact that it stayed during a glitch felt like the kind of accident that refuses to be ignored. It asked for someone to slow down. Her work is not a string of heroic saves. It is a long practice of noticing small, true things before they slip beneath a wave of noise. The photo taught her something she already knew. Details are not decorations, and time is never a blur when someone chooses to write things down. The story ends without fireworks because that is how most true stories end. A hallway returns to normal, and a system gets a little less clumsy. Kira drives home with the window cracked and a song on low volume. She knows nothing can make the loss tidy, but clarity still matters. She unlocks her door, drops her bag, and checks her phone for one last message. The queue is empty, and the app finally reads, "Upload complete." She smiles once without any triumph, then she turns off the light and lets the day settle while the city hums and the clock keeps moving. The stories. Night Guard, who followed footprints beyond the bridge. The first prints showed on a cold night when the river smoked and the closed bridge let out a slow iron groan. Frost held the gravel in a crust, so every step someone took across the municipal yard snapped like thin glass. Merrick Holland worked nights because he liked quiet places and because the warehouse paid overtime when storms rolled in. He was 41 by the last week of January, and he kept his thermos on the dash while he did his rounds. His plan was simple that night. Check the north fence. Check the generator shed. Sign the log before dawn and head home on the empty road. He saw the prints on his second pass, and their path made little sense when he stood still to study them. The footprints curved toward the pedestrian bridge that crossed the narrow river, which had been closed since late autumn while crews waited on parts. A chain-link panel barred the entrance with a sign that warned about unsafe decking, and Marek knew the sign by heart. He radioed the dispatcher with a routine note, since procedure made repeaters of careful guards. He kept his words easy. He said there were footprints where there should be none, and that he would check closer. The reply was scratchy and bored, and Merrick almost laughed at the familiar tone. The treads were small and tidy, like work boots with a diamond pattern, and each step pressed the frost to a dark oval. The prince went right up to the chain link panel, then slipped under at a low spot where someone had pulled wire loose. Merrick knelt and touched the ground, and cold shot through his glove while he reset the bent ties. He peered down the dark shape of the bridge and decided he would not walk out there in the cold wind, not without telling someone first. He called again, then kept his flashlight tight to the decking while he stepped forward, and he felt the bridge vibrate under his boots. He moved slow, because he always moved slow when he could choose between slow and fast. Halfway across, the prince turned to powder as the frost thinned, and he had to scan both sides for scuffs on the gray boards. He found a faint line where grit had dragged, like something heavy had been pulled by rope. On the far side, the deck ended at a set of concrete steps that dropped to the river path, and here the prince deepened again. They pointed left, past an old pipe cradle and a low stand of scrub willow. Reports in the fall had mentioned fishers along the bank after hours, which was normal, and a few had been moved along without trouble. A clerk at the gas station had told an officer that a man bought batteries and duct tape in the same visit, which was normal enough, though people sometimes remember strange details when asked at night. Dispatch logs showed power dips near the intake station from time to time, and maintenance had chalked that up to loose connections in cold weather. Marek followed the prince along the river path until they vanished near a patch of bare gravel that the sun struck most days, even in winter. He stood there and listened. Somewhere upstream, an owl made 3 soft calls, and a semi rolled past on the highway with a roar that shook the willow branches. He decided he had gone far enough for one night. He photographed the prince on his phone and headed back, and he wrote a careful note in the log before dawn. By the next shift, the frost lifted late, and the yard lights burned a clean white circle on the gravel. Merrick checked the generator shed first and noticed something he could not shake. The small lock on the diesel cap was scuffed, and a scratch ran from the cap to the lip like a hose had rubbed while someone steadied a weight. He checked the fuel slip from the last delivery and did the quick math. The level looked low by a few gallons, which could happen, and which also could not. He spoke with Celia Karp in maintenance the following afternoon because Celia knew more about the place than anyone in the office. Celia was 58 and had worked 3 floods and 2 droughts, and she kept a pocket notebook with every code for every panel. She said the power dips had been shrugged off by city, and that nobody had time to pull the panels until spring. She said the bridge closure made her nervous because blocked paths invite shortcuts. On the 3rd night, Marek went to the bridge before his first pass, and he crouched at the chain link panel with a small bag of sidewalk chalk from the supply closet. He rubbed a pinch of red chalk into the dirt under the gap and dusted the decking where the prince had scuffed before. He wanted a way to tell if someone crossed again, and he wanted to see where the dust went when the night did its work. He made his rounds slower than usual and kept his eyes on corners where things hide without trying. The radio remained quiet until midnight. Then a call came in about a coyote by the south gate. Marek drove down and found only wind, and he thought the call felt like a joke he had heard before. He logged it anyway, because logs are the bones of quiet jobs. When he returned to the bridge, his light caught the faintest red sunset on the boards, and he felt alert in the way he liked. The chalk had smeared in a thin line toward the far steps, and the dust trailed down to the river path. On the gravel, small red flecks marked an arc that led behind a stack of old culvert pipe where few people bothered to look. He moved closer and found a cooler wedged inside a culvert mouth, and an inverter buzzed inside like a tired hornet. A length of clear hose lay coiled by the cooler, and the nozzle had a strip of duct tape where a leak had been patched. The setup looked temporary and careful, like someone trusted routine more than luck. Marek called dispatch, and his voice stayed even while he chose words that would not set hairs on necks. An officer drove down the service road and met him by the culvert, and they stood and listened together. The officer did not rush, which Marek respected, and the 2 men watched the bridge until the wind shifted. The officer said he would put a note on the morning brief, and he asked Marek to keep eyes open without playing hero. The phrase made Marek smile, and later he did not tell that part to anyone. In the days after, Marek traced the quiet pattern that repeats when someone abuses access. He checked camera angles and discovered the north yard camera had been bumped on a date that matched a power dip, and the new angle showed the sky more than the gate. He opened the back of the housing and found 3 screws missing, which was always a tell. He measured the footprints with a scrap of tape and got the same length each time, which told him the walker was careful with steps or else was one person always. He walked to the diner 2 blocks away during the afternoon and chatted with the cook named Huxley, who knew every vehicle that rolled through after midnight. Huxley said a man in a dark jacket sat late 2 nights a week, always with a single cup of coffee and a pocket radio on the booth seat. Huxley said the man tipped exact change and left when the freight trains crossed the river, which happened near the time Marion Street patrol cars swapped shifts. At the yard, a temporary guard from an agency had been filling 2 nights that Mark traded away for overtime on weekends. The temp signed the log with 2 letters and a quick crooked line. The initials were H and P, which matched about 1,000 people and which could match none. Merrick did not care for suspicion as a hobby, yet he did not care for coincidences when fuel levels fell in quiet inches. He sat in his sedan before shift and went through old notes in his glove box where he kept manuals and photocopies. A contractor named Deacon Varelli had lost access in 2017 after a billing fight, and his crew had worked the intake station on that very river path for years. Merrick wrote the name on a small card, then tossed the card at once, because names can lead you down the wrong hall. He kept his attention on the temp schedule instead, and he compared logs against the chalk nights and the reported coyote calls. On a dry Tuesday, red chalk showed again on the gravel, and the cooler in the culvert had moved 2 feet, which looked like a nervous person trying to outsmart the obvious. Marek called the non-emergency number and asked for a quiet presence, and officers waited with their lights low behind the old salt shed. Marek did his rounds with wide loops and checked his watch without seeming to check, and he waited on the near side of the bridge by the chain link panel. A figure came over the crest like a shadow that had business, and the boots set down in precise little ovals. The man wore a dark jacket with reflective piping like the agency issued, and he carried a duffel that sagged from weight. Merrick stepped forward and kept his light on the ground, and he spoke steady without trying to sound like an actor. He said the bridge was closed by order of city, and he asked if help was needed. The man froze and looked left toward the culvert, which told Marek the only thing he really needed to know. The officers stepped from behind the shed, and everything stayed dull and true from there. The duffel held a 12-volt pump, a power bank, and 2 hoses cut to different lengths. The cooler held the inverter and spare tape and a stack of empty hand warmers, which can keep batteries alive just long enough between dips. The generator diesel cap carried the same tape residue as the hose, which tied the loop neatly enough for any careful mind. In the report that later circulated, details sat plain without flourish, which is how such documents talk to the world. The temp guard was named Harley Pruitt, age 36, and he had worked a roster of small night jobs that rewarded boredom more than skill. Archived calls showed he had reported animal movement at the south gate on the nights when the pump likely ran, which kept eyes away from the river path. Store security footage from across the highway reportedly showed a man matching his build, buying duct tape and batteries on a schedule that matched power dips at the intake station. Celia came down with a wrench the following morning and replaced the generator cap, and she tightened every panel on every camera while humming through her teeth. She shook Merrick's hand with hard gratitude, and she told him the thing she always tells the new ones. Quiet places are never empty, and attention is the difference between a close call and a cleanup. People in town talked for a day, and then they talked about weather and games and a boat stuck on the ramp. Merrick logged his shift and ran a cloth across the dusty dash, and he looked once at the bridge where the chain link panel still hung crooked. He felt a small weight lift, which felt almost like pride, and then he felt something more like relief. He went back to the prints in his head, and he ran the path out again from the first night to the last. The steps had led beyond the bridge in the way tracks tell their whole story, and the red chalk had given him a quiet mouth. He thought about the way a small problem can hide inside a larger closure, and how a closed bridge invites someone to think rules are only suggestion. He drove the empty road home before dawn, and the river threw thin fog across the low bend like quiet breath. Merrick did not decide to keep working nights forever, and he did not make any grand vow. He thought instead about the small habits that keep a place honest and the way a single set of prints can reveal a patient plan. In a town that prefers routine, a careful person with time can pull things apart slowly, unless another careful person keeps watch and asks simple questions that carry weight. By spring, the bridge opened again with new planks that smelled like fresh-cut pine, and families leaned on the rail to watch geese slide by. Some people remember a rumor when they cross, while most only hear water and light traffic and the chatter of kids. Merrick crosses when his route calls for it, and he never looks for drama, though he notices scuffs out of habit and checks if gates sit straight. He keeps chalk in the glove box still, and he keeps a small card that reminds him that attention wins more often than luck. The card does not carry a name, and it does not need one, because the lesson was simple and dull and true. He followed footprints beyond a bridge that everyone ignored, and he found a tidy machine made for taking small pieces of a place that trusted silence. Quiet work gave him back a little faith, which is worth more on a night shift than any badge or speech. When people ask him why he noticed, Marek says it was the shape of the morning frost and the numbers that never add fare. He tells them he just kept walking where the prince asked him to go, and he wrote things down when they mattered. He says a bridge is still a path even when closed, and that someone will use that fact to their advantage at least once. The rest of the time, he does not say much, and he lets the town hold its small stories without fuss, because most of them end with someone paying attention and returning what does not belong to them. The stories. Why this motel room safe changed everything. They called it a budget motel along a long highway spur, where road dust gathered in corners and secrets settled quietly. The room safe in number 12 looked ordinary enough, powder-coated steel with a keypad that beeped politely at tired travelers. Lyle Garza woke before sunrise on a Tuesday, 38 years old, and working claims for a regional insurer. He had driven 3 hours to meet a policyholder whose pickup had burned behind the old diner, and he wanted clean paperwork today. He checked into the motel first, showered fast, then laid out forms on the dresser, careful about matching VIN digits and timestamps. His plan was simple: wrap the inspection before lunch, then circle back for photos and voice notes after the truck release. He liked driving while the day still felt open, and he told himself the assignment would be routine and forgettable. It had been forgettable until the manager knocked. 2 quick raps, then a pause heavy enough to make him frown. Mara Quintero stood in the doorway with a clipboard, 34, managing rooms and payroll while raising her nephew after school. She asked if he had heard the beeps from the safe, because front desk saw brief power spikes last night. Lyle said he had not used the safe, and she nodded, eyes moving toward the keypad like someone checking a stove twice. Maintenance had logged an odd complaint the previous afternoon. Reportedly, a guest in 12 claimed the safe ate his wallet. The man left before checkout, promising to call the card companies, and a note in the margin said possible intoxication. Mara said housekeeping later pulled the bedding and found a small metal tool near the baseboard. Lyle picked up the tool carefully with a tissue, a thin square of steel with a notch like a feeler gauge. He set it on the desk with his forms, then opened his voice recorder, speaking in that steady tone he used for field notes. He described the room, the safe brand, the tool, and the time on the microwave clock because simple details held steady on lonely days. Mara asked if he knew how to clear the safe code since the master sheet had gone missing during renovations last winter. He did not, but he knew the trick of powering off consumer locks, which could flip hidden defaults, according to a warehouse supervisor he once interviewed. He unplugged the mini fridge, found the breaker panel behind a painting, then asked permission to shut the room briefly. They stood in the doorway while the lights flickered, and the highway hummed like a restless air conditioner beyond the lot. He waited 10 seconds, restored power, then tapped the keypad with a ballpoint, feeling silly and a little curious. The safe beeped twice in a lower tone, which he recognized from a training video about apartment lockouts, reportedly used by traveling warranty teams. He tried a factory code that someone had once mumbled during a fire inspection, and the safe chirped, green light winking. The door opened an inch against a sticky seal, and Mara let out a nervous laugh, surprised and worried in equal measure. Inside sat a clear zipper pouch with a folded receipt, a motel keycard from another town, and a small black voice recorder. He found a driver loyalty card attached to the receipt, and he read the printed name softly without repeating it twice. The dates lined up with last week in neat columns, and the purchase list looked like roadside dinners between midnight and 2. He asked Mara if the guest from yesterday had paid cash, and she nodded, then reached for the phone to check archived calls. The front desk handset kept scratchy tapes by default, a habit from the previous owner who never trusted software invoices. She played a call stamped at 2 in the morning, where a tired voice asked for room 12, mentioning a late delivery, and stiffed back. Another call at 2:30 asked about vending, and a third at 4 asked if nobody would bother him until noon. Lyle switched to evidence mode, careful and methodical, letting his coffee cool while he cataloged the pouch contents. He photographed the safe before moving anything, then called his supervisor to report an unexpected discovery unrelated to the truck claim. The supervisor told him to act reasonably and preserve anything with identifiable information, then to keep his focus on the scheduled inspection. He listened to the voice recorder after asking Mara to stay within earshot, since 2 listeners felt wiser than one on strange mornings. The first file held roadway noise, then a quiet tone of someone rehearsing directions, same room number repeated like a sticky thought. The second file was shorter, a man saying he could not keep doing this and that she would understand once it was delivered safely. He paused to note the words safely, which felt pointed given the open door and the blinking keypad. He bagged the recorder in a zip bag from his kit, then checked the keycard from the other town, which was stamped with a lion logo. Mara recognized the chain and said there was a property 30 miles north, mostly used by truckers and medical travelers. He returned the room to normal and headed for the burned truck with his camera bag, but his plan had started to wobble. The pickup sat behind a towing yard fence, soot clinging thick to the firewall, while melted wires drooped like tired ivy. He worked the usual grid of photos, then the odometer and the cargo bed, then cross-reference with dispatch notes he had requested by email. The fire report smelled like common engine loss, not sabotage, and he felt relief settle along his shoulders as the cause narrowed. He dictated measurements and closed the laptop, then looked at his watch and thought about the safe again and the trembling voice. He felt a nudge of duty that had nothing to do with premiums, and he drove back to the motel through heat that made the road shimmer. Mara met him with a printout of last night guests, which listed an alias that matched the loyalty card name partly. The address field showed a mail drop location, familiar to freight drivers who rolled through without a fixed base. She said a long white tractor had idled near the ice machine last night, according to a neighbor who called about fumes after midnight. He asked for the neighbor number, then listened to a careful woman describe a man in a reflective jacket with a limp. She said he stayed near room 12 door, not inside, as if waiting for someone to arrive quietly or leave quickly. She heard 2 quiet knocks around 3, and a soft voice answered, then a cart rattle like someone moving luggage without wheels. Lyle opened the pouch again and noticed a handwritten code on the receipt back, 4 digits and a messy star next to it. He tried the code on the safe, and the delay light flashed, which often meant an old user lockout or a wrong sequence. He snapped a photo and lowered the door, then rolled the notched tool between his fingers, a weight that felt borrowed from someone patient. He thought about a repairman he had interviewed in 2019, who taught him that thieves love patterns more than courage. The man said patterns live in receipts, tolls, and vending logs, because tired people seek familiar sandwiches and coffee brands. Lyle searched the loyalty program website on his phone, typed the partial name and 4 digits, and got a generic profile with travel points. The profile showed recent redemptions listed by city, and he wrote them on a notepad, then drew lines between dates and approximate routes. The cities formed a loop around distribution centers, with brief pauses near hospitals and bulk pharmacy hubs according to public maps. He felt his heart step faster as the voice recorder line about delivered safely nudged his thoughts toward the quiet side of medicine. He told Mara he would drive north to the Lion Logo Motel for a quick visit, and she insisted on calling ahead politely. The clerk up there skimmed her stay sheets and mentioned a forgotten envelope last week, found under a mattress frame during turnover. The envelope held nothing when housekeeping retrieved it, but a corner showed marks from a rubber band, reportedly stretched tight. He reached the northern property by mid-afternoon, watched trucks rock gently in wind, and asked for the manager on duty. A tall man with tired eyes met him in the lobby, said a nurse had asked about a lost pouch 3 nights ago. She wore a badge from a staffing agency, spoke quickly, and left a number that went to voicemail full by morning. The manager allowed a quick look at the lost and found cabinet, which contained phone chargers, a chipped mug, 3 lanyards, and a plastic bag with an empty pharmacy sticker peeled halfway. Lyle photographed the bag and wrote the former label number carefully, then stepped into the parking lot to call a friend in compliance he trusted. The friend checked a public database of recalls and shortages, then told him to consider the rise in small clinical thefts along transport corridors. He returned to his car and replayed the second audio file, hearing the way the man swallowed hard between sentences. The phrase "delivered safely" stuck again, and he wondered if safely meant to someone specific, not to a warehouse or anonymous shelf. He drove back to the first motel with a plan forming, not quite a theory, but a set of steps that could either untangle or embarrass him. He asked Mara for permission to review last week's camera footage that covered the breezeway near room 12, and she agreed. The feed was old, grainy, and stamped with the wrong date, since nobody reset it after storms in 2015. Still, silhouettes moved clearly enough. And at 3:12, a figure in a reflective jacket appeared with a short, careful stride. The figure waited near the door, then crouched to slide something under, then stood fast as another figure approached from the stairwell. The second person carried a rolling cart with a blanket thrown over, which hung low enough to hide a small, cooler shape. They exchanged a short handshake, then rolled the cart toward the soda machine area, where cameras always blinked with static. Lyle paused the frame and sketched the handshake position, because small, consistent gestures tied people to habits when faces stayed hidden. He compared the notebook times to the archived calls, matching the neighbor report with the footage minute stamp nearly exactly. He folded his notes and looked at Mara, who watched quietly with the clipboard held like a shield against a sudden chill. He called the non-emergency line and asked to speak with property crimes, then explained he was an adjuster who found items in a room safe. He said the items might connect to an ongoing pattern, not a single incident, and that he was available to hand them over cleanly. The dispatcher thanked him and routed the call, and he kept his voice steady while explaining that nobody was hurt today. The detective who arrived wore a tie gone soft at the edges, a man who had seen this exact motel a dozen times. He took the pouch, the recorder, and copies of the photos, then asked Lyle to explain the breaker trick and the code attempts. He nodded at the handshake frame and said a group had moved product along back roads for months, staying under dollar thresholds on purpose. Lyle asked quietly if product meant medicine, and the detective said people cut solutions with water and resold to small clinics. In some stories, the clinics were victims with forged orders, and in others, they were partners, trying to stretch short supplies like taffy. The man in the reflector jacket likely ran deliveries for cash while hauling legal freight, which made tracing routes messy and confusing. The detective listened to the voice files twice, then looked at the loyalty redemptions and circled 2 cities with his pen. He said the phrase "delivered safely" could mean to a person at a care home who could not pay official prices anymore. The pouch might have served as a drop signal, and the room safe might have held a stopgap in case someone panicked. They took statements from Mara and the neighbor by phone, and the manager at the northern property sent a scanned copy of his notes. The detective collected the notch tool and said it was standard for bypassing cam locks, which matched a series of quiet thefts from vending. He asked Lyle to write a formal summary of his steps, meticulous and dated, and to expect a follow-up if a warrant landed later. Lyle finished the paper part in his room, breathing slow while light crept through the blinds in a warm, tired stripe. He wrote down the way the safe beeped twice after power restoration, which suggested a default that any one patient could eventually find. He wrote the route loop and the hospital adjacency, and he wrote the voice phrasing exactly because transcription mattered when memories warped. He closed his laptop and stared at the open safe like it wanted to be ordinary again, silent and blank and light. He felt that shift people talk about when routine work bends into something it has no business touching on a weekday. He thought about honest clinics, rationing doses, then about someone paying cash at 3 in the morning because a parent cried. At dusk, the detective called back and said a unit found the white tractor idling near a different budget property downtown. The driver had the same chain lanyard from the lost and found cabinet, and his phone contained notes about room safes by brand. He reportedly told officers he was only a messenger and that someone else handled actual swapping and dilution, which sounded flat and practiced. Lyle listened quietly and said he would be available if a deposition request arrived. Then he sat with the keycard on the dresser. He knew he would remember the feel of that notched tool because it had a purpose-built patience that felt personal. He knew he would remember the cheap beep of the safe and the way a single small space changed the line of his day. A week later, he got an email from the detective, brief and measured, thanking him for the timeline and the careful photos. The message said the pouch had traces of saline and a label adhesive compound common to medical packaging of a certain class. The voice on the recorder matched a man pulled over near a way station, according to dispatch logs and an archived booking photo. Lyle drove back to the motel after closing another case, and he asked Mara how business felt since the long Tuesday. She said people still stopped for highway rest, and she tightened a few procedures quietly, preferring to let small changes speak. She now kept master codes in a locked drawer and replaced 3 aging safes with models that logged attempts for a full week. They stood in room 12 a moment, like visitors paying respects to an inanimate witness that never blinked. The safe sat closed and calm, doing exactly what a box was meant to do, which felt both reassuring and strange. He signed the receipt for his stay, then shook her hand, and promised to bring better stories next time through. On the drive home, he thought about the phrase delivered safely again and how words can hide more than they reveal. He wondered how many small transactions keep the world running, good and bad, unremarkable and decisive, stacked behind quiet doors. He decided the safe had not made him heroic or special, it had only reminded him that dull edges can cut when pressure builds. He kept working claims, taking pictures of bent bumpers and damp carpet, writing notes with careful times and plain language. He still believed that truth likes details, and that details prefer patient notebooks, not flashy speeches or clever hunches. When he thought about that Tuesday, he did not think about danger or chase lights. He thought about how a box opened and a day veered left. Mara hired another housekeeper and bought a better cart, one that glided without rattling near cameras and soda machines. She laughed more at the front desk now, but her eyes still checked keys and codes before she turned off the lights. She told her nephew that small routines matter, like counting towels and returning clipboards, because order resists the creep of careless luck. The detective moved on to other cases and sent one last note months later, carefully worded, acknowledging ongoing court schedules. He wrote that the room safe discovery had clarified timing between suspects, which helped align witness statements with fuel receipts precisely. He added a line about public hearings scheduled for late next spring, where facts would hopefully land on paper clearly. The motel kept renting room 12 to travelers who wanted ground-level convenience and an easy walk to the ice. The safe held wallets and passports and nothing dramatic for a while, which suited everyone whose name stayed off any report. The highway kept pouring itself past the parking lot, and the night clerk kept coffee hot for anyone who needed comfort. Lyle sometimes thought about stopping by without a claim, just to buy a soda and wave at the office through dusty glass. He pictured the safe blinking quietly in that square of afternoon sun, as if practicing for whatever day came next. He accepted that the box had not changed him completely, but it had polished a habit he already valued deeply. He looked back on it like a narrow bridge he crossed safely, not a legend, just a real span over a quiet creek. He had listened, he had written, he had looked twice, and he had taken small steps that lined up neatly. That felt like enough for a life that preferred steady roads to loud headlines, and it still does. The stories. This dispatcher flagged a warning nobody else heard. In the summer of 2015, a small county dispatch center in the Midwest logged what should have been another quiet night routine calls, minor accidents, nothing serious. But at 2:36 a.m., dispatcher Lorna Keats flagged a single line in the call log with a red warning tag. The rest of the shift didn't notice. 12 hours later, a missing person report came in from the same road. Lorna was 52, a mother of 3, and one of the few veteran dispatchers still working nights. She'd spent more than 20 years listening to the county breathe through static. Drunk drivers, runaway teens, distant gunshots that usually turned out to be fireworks. That night, she was scheduled to train a new hire, Evan Rhodes, a quiet 20-something fresh out of community college. He remembered her as calm, methodical someone who double-checked even the quiet calls. The call in question lasted just 19 seconds. It came from an unregistered prepaid cell phone traced to the stretch of County Route 47 between mile markers 19 and 20. The caller didn't say much, just a breathy male voice repeating, "He's still here," before the line cut. Background noise? Steady hum, maybe an engine, maybe wind? Lorna replayed the audio 3 times, then filed it under possible domestic disturbance. But something made her stop the recording and reopen it. According to her later statement, she heard a faint ticking sound under the voice mechanical, uneven. Like a turn signal that never clicked off, she said. At 2:38, she added a note, "Warning possible vehicle hazard, County 47. No one responded. The patrol car assigned to that region had already been rerouted to a stranded motorist 15 miles away. The shift ended at 6, and by the next day, the flag was buried beneath dozens of other overnight notes. 2 days later, a farmer found a truck half submerged in a drainage ditch along the same stretch of road. Inside was 30-year-old Bradley Norham, a construction worker from a nearby town. Engine still idling, phone missing, seatbelt unlatched. Coroner placed the time of death around 2:40 that same morning, within minutes of Lorna's flagged call. County investigators wrote it up as a single-vehicle accident. They said Bradley likely swerved to avoid a deer, hit the embankment, and drowned before he could escape. Lorna, however, couldn't let it go. She'd handled too many wrecks to ignore the timing. The ticking sound, the phrase, "he's still here," the untraceable number, it didn't add up. A week later, she retrieved the audio from archive storage and took it home on a thumb drive. Her husband found her replaying it that evening, headphones pressed tight, not speaking for almost an hour. She said she thought she heard 2 different voices, one layered under the main one. A whisper, or maybe a radio echo, she told him. He dismissed it as interference, but Lorna wasn't satisfied. She called the phone company listed in the report, Westridge Cellular, to ask about prepaid tower logs. The representative told her the call had pinged off a repeater near Old Mill Road, 2 miles east of the crash. Problem was, that tower had been offline for maintenance between midnight and 3 a.m. She double-checked through county records. The outage was confirmed. If that was true, the call shouldn't have connected at all. When she brought this to her supervisor, he told her it wasn't her concern. "The system hiccups sometimes," he said. "Let it go." Instead, she filed a quiet memo through the internal server detailing her findings and sent a copy to a friend in the State Highway Patrol. The friend, Officer Miriam Cole, kept the note, but admitted later she didn't think much of it until months afterward. Then, in November of that year, a storm knocked out power across the same district. During the outage, technicians discovered a repeater box still running from an auxiliary generator, a model decommissioned years earlier. Inside it was a burned SIM card fused into the port. Serial number partially visible. It matched the first digits of the untraceable phone from Lorna's warning. This detail never made the official report. A small internal inquiry followed, but concluded there was no functional link between the repeater malfunction and any known incident. By that point, Lorna had already transferred to a day shift. She told coworkers she didn't want to hear the night anymore. Years later, a regional journalist researching abandoned communication systems stumbled on the archived memo. The journalist, Alan Marin, interviewed Lorna at her kitchen table in 2020. By then, she'd retired and moved to a smaller town near the river. In the recording, which he later shared for a local podcast, she said something quietly that caught his attention. "You know what gets me?" he said. "He's still here." Not, "I'm still here." Someone else was supposed to hear it. Alan followed the breadcrumb trail dispatch logs, weather reports, the crash file, and that malfunctioning repeater. He found that the generator inside had been serviced twice after its supposed decommission date, each time by a subcontractor called Northspan Utilities. Northspan had folded in 2013, 2 years before the incident. Whoever maintained that repeater after the shutdown wasn't listed in county records. Allen managed to contact one former Northspan technician, a man named Dennis Harlow. Dennis said that in the early 2000s, some repeaters were used to piggyback maintenance frequencies for nearby rail lines. It was a cheap way to test emergency signals, he said. But it was never supposed to overlap with civilian channels. If it did, you'd get bleed-through, like ghost calls. Ghost calls. That term caught traction online when Allen's podcast aired, though Lorna hated it. She said the word ghost turned it into superstition, not signal bleed, not malfunction. Still, she admitted the possibility haunted her. The crash site, the voice, the timestamp, they lined up too neatly. In 2021, the county repaved Route 47, covering the drainage ditch. The wreckage was long removed, but for maintenance training, new dispatchers were still shown the red-flagged log from that night as a case study in procedural diligence. The warning nobody else heard became a quiet legend among the staff, half cautionary tale, half proof of how easily small details slip away. What remained were fragments. The 19-second clip archived under a generic file name, the memo Lorna wrote, the service invoices from Northspan, and the coroner's note listing water in the lungs. Each on its own could mean nothing. Together, they formed a pattern too odd to ignore but too thin to prove. Lorna passed away in 2023. At her retirement gathering the year before, a few old colleagues brought up the story. She just smiled and said, "It was probably static." Then, according to Evan, her trainee from that night, she added quietly, "But static comes from somewhere." At this point, the facts that remained were simple. One call, one warning, one man dead on a dark county road. The system logged everything perfectly except for the truth behind that 19-second window. Whether it was interference, a misrouted test frequency, or something else, no one could ever show exactly who made that call or why it stopped where it did. Still, in the dispatch training manual filed a few years later, there's a footnote beside Lorna's case study. It reads, "Always listen twice before you clear a line." No capital letters, no bold text, just quiet advice embedded between procedural codes. A reminder that sometimes the sound we dismiss as noise might be the only signal that matters. The stories. Dispatcher who redialed a night number years later. The call that woke the overnight desk never finished cleanly, and the number that hung up stayed burned into memory. The report marked it as an incomplete welfare check request, and the audio ended right after a sharp breath. Leora Vance worked nights at a regional communications center, 36, steady voice, quick notes, routine coffee. She covered a patchwork of small towns around a river, and her goal that night was simple and ordinary. She wanted to make it through the shift with clean logs, then drive home before sunrise. At 2:43, the line flashed unknown number, and a woman whispered that somebody was on the porch. The voice cracked like cold glass, and static clipped the rest, so Leora asked the normal questions. The call died mid-sentence, and the return attempt fed a busy tone that rolled like a slow alarm. Protocol said, "Log it, dispatch a unit, and move forward with the map." She sent 2 cars across county lines, and she wrote porch contact unknown female, possible prowler, audio cutout. The officers found a silent street and a door light, and the porch camera showed only a moth. The address did not match the call trace, which often happened with rural switches. The closest relevant record was a break-in from 1998, and the same street used to be named differently on paper maps. The officers cleared without contact, and Leora filed it under incomplete with a notation on poor signal. She replayed the clip during the quiet hour before dawn, and she heard a faint tone behind the voice. She had a habit of catching tiny sounds people missed, and she logged them like breadcrumbs for later check. The tone matched the alert from older medical pendants, according to an equipment chart in her drawer. 2 days later, the number could not be connected, and the carrier reported a recycled pool of lines. A supervisor closed the incident, as resolved by patrol presence, and life returned to the ordinary rhythm of alarms and traffic. Leora drove home through thin drizzle and told herself to let the record settle. Years slid by with new software and different chairs, and Leora moved into training and quality checks. She taught new dispatchers to separate panic from facts and to trust logs more than late-night adrenaline. She kept a notebook of unresolved lines, a quiet ledger of what the radio called ghosts. In 2005, a county audit required purging old tapes, and Leora requested the call as a training sample. She argued that the tape showed how to verify address data when signals bounced, and the review board agreed to preserve it. She placed the audio in a folder for classroom use, then forgot it for a while. In 2017, the center switched to digital recording with automatic transcription for flagged words. The legacy folder ported into the new system, and the software saw porch and pendant, then tagged it for quality review. Leora listened again and heard the same faint tone, which still felt wrong and unfinished. She noticed a rhythm behind the static, and it repeated every 6 seconds with small variants. A trainee suggested a smoke detector chirp, but the pattern felt too mechanical for a battery warning. Leora wrote a new note, and she marked it as likely device signal not from residents. A retired technician stopped by for coffee and heard the clip through an open speaker. He said the beeping sounded like a hallway alarm from a care facility, and the pitch matched certain wall units. He gave a rough model name from years earlier, and he shrugged in that cautious way field techs learn. Witness statements in older town council minutes mentioned a small facility that closed in 2006. The building sat at the edge of a service road near the river, and the license lapsed after staff shortages. The address never showed in the dispatch mapping tool, which favored current businesses and active residences. Leora searched archived calls around that road and found short bursts from unknown lines that year. Each clip cut off before a name, and the patrol responses found nothing but chained doors and dust. A maintenance crew had watched the property for a bank, according to one officer report from Spring. She pulled tax records from the county site and found a change of ownership in 2007. The building title shifted to a holding company, which often meant redevelopment, which never came. A satellite photo showed a roof with patched squares and a light pole that leaned toward the access lane. The night number from the porch call mapped to a carrier block once used inside institutions. A policy note in an old binder described internal extensions that could overflow to outbound lines when certain failsafes trip. It was not proof, but it lined up with what the technician had described over coffee. She visited the records room on her lunch and requested dispatch logs for that road after 2006. The clerk pulled a slim folder with dust, and the sheets listed trespass checks requested by neighbors. No violent incidents were recorded, and most notes referenced animals and teens daring each other. A faded memo said interior power was cut to code years ago, and alarms were disconnected with a certificate. The memo was initialed by a contractor who later moved out of state, according to a local paperclip. The paper mentioned a minor zoning fight over repurposing, which stalled and faded. A rumor in a neighborhood forum referenced late-night lights near the loading door, reportedly seen by a delivery driver. The driver claimed to hear a tone like a distant truck backup, and then nothing after he blinked his high beams. The forum thread ended with jokes, and the administrator locked it after a week. Leora requested permission to run a courtesy check by phone on the legacy carrier block. She wrote that the new system showed occasional pings from inactive numbers, and she wanted to verify with the provider. The provider sent a bland letter that said non-billable pings could reflect maintenance checks, which proved little. She let it go again until 2021, when a cold storm knocked power around much of the valley. The center fielded hundreds of calls for downed lines and trees, and unknown numbers flooded the switch when cell towers failed. The old number flashed across a test screen, and a note in red tagged it as historic. It hit her in the middle of managing a pile of alarms, and she felt the odd gravity of unfinished work. Her trainee, a quiet analyst named Mateo Greer, saw her stare and asked what history followed that line. She explained the porch call, the tone, the closed facility, and the recurring pings during outages. He suggested a careful redial during low traffic hours, which fit policy when no private party would be disturbed. The number technically did not belong to a person, and the facility was listed as vacant in tax files. The watch commander noted no risk and approved a controlled test with recording flagged as training. At 3:10 the next night, Leora sat with Mateo in a side room and pressed redial on a clean console. The ring returned at a low volume, and a relay clicked before a voice picked up with a machine crawl. The voice said, "Reception desk. Please hold." The line stayed open with air and faint humming. Leora spoke carefully, and she used the generic script for a wellness verification at an inactive site. The line did not respond like normal interactive voice response, and the hum rose, then settled like heating vents. Mateo pointed to the waveform on the screen, and he traced a stair-step that pulsed in threes. She said the center needed to verify status for a safety audit, and could a staff member confirm the building as empty. The voice returned with a single word, and it sounded like census, which made no sense for a desk. The hum changed to a thinner tone, and something clicked like a phone being set down. They stayed quiet, and a tiny echo carried an off-room sound that resembled elevator chimes. The building never had an elevator, according to the old permit in the zoning files, which listed 2 floors only. The chime could have been something else, or a bleed from another source through a carrier trunk. The call lasted 2 minutes, and then a hard click ended it with no final acknowledgement or goodbye. Leora logged every detail with exact time and the conditions of the room, plus the fact that a second console witnessed. She wrote that the voice felt recorded, but not like a standard system recording from that era. A next step followed policy, which said request a daytime site check with property access if possible. The sheriff office called the management company, which reported that the interior phones were long removed with certification. A maintenance vendor met deputies at noon, and the group entered through a side door with a stubborn hinge. They found clean air, paint flakes, and a smell like dry paper after long storage. No phones sat on desks, and no wiring hung from ceilings beyond bundled tubes cut and capped. A panel in the back room had a line of dead indicators, and a label from 2006 named the contractor. A back storage closet held a metal cabinet for telecom terminations, and inside a single light glowed green. The maintenance vendor said the light probably fed from a battery pack, which should have died many years earlier. He pulled the pack, and the light stayed green, which made him raise his eyebrows without a word. They traced the last live wire through conduit to a junction box near the loading door by the ramp. The box led to an old underground line that likely connected to a central office by the highway. The vendor said a ghost loop could be holding a stub signal, which might ring when jolted by storms. The explanation fit enough to calm nerves, and it gave the watch commander a line to give any curious council member. Leora filed the daytime result and waited for the routine to end, but her notebook felt heavier than before. She wanted something cleaner, a line that tied the porch call to a person. She checked archived calls for names near the facility in late 2005, and a surname appeared twice. The name belonged to a kitchen worker who reportedly stayed late to clean and who left town soon after closure. A short article from a community paper mentioned a farewell potluck in a church hall. A social post from years later showed a small photo of a medal on a refrigerator and a caption about nights that never end. The account had poor privacy settings, and it linked to a page for a caretaker group that offered mutual aid. The group had a public list of contacts, and one number matched the surname. She called during the afternoon from a staff phone and explained she was a dispatcher reviewing a historic alarm. The woman who answered identified herself as the former cook, and she said the night phones were a mess back then. She remembered plugging a line into a wall to ask for help during a snow night, then hanging up fast. The year matched the period before closure, and the memory included a porch light that never switched off correctly. The cook said a hallway alarm sometimes tripped when wind hit the wheelchairs stacked near an exit door. She said a pendant kept calling the desk after the resident moved, and staff joked about it. Leora asked if anyone had used an emergency night number taped under a desk, and the woman hesitated, then said maybe. She said an old laminated card listed a direct outside line for after hours when the main switch froze. She added that the card got lost during a water leak, and the sticker glue ruined 2 drawers. The detail matched a photo in the zoning files that showed bubbled plywood under a window near the desk. The water issue provided another path for odd faults, which could keep a line limping and ring when power fluctuated. The cook promised to look through an old box for any scraps, and she promised nothing more. Days later, an envelope arrived addressed to the center with no return, and inside lay half a laminated card. The text read, "Night number for direct line. Use only if house phones fail." The bottom showed 6 digits with 2 missing. The plastic edge was cracked, and a brown stain cut through the second line. Leora held the fragment near the recording console and felt the story settle into a shape that made sense. The porch call likely came from a staffer trying to poke through a dead switch, and the tone was the hallway alarm. The number carried forward through bureaucratic leftovers, and it rang when the storm hit the loop. She still needed the humane piece. The person whose whisper said someone was on the porch that night. She checked weather records for a cold snap that matched the reported snow night, and the timeline met the audit note. A dispatch log from the same week showed a trespass call at a different address with no contact. The officer who filed that trespass had retired to a nearby town, and he answered his landline on a sunny afternoon. He remembered a night when snow fell like ash and radios kept picking up carrier noise. He also remembered stopping near the old facility entrance, then leaving after seeing only footprints of a stray dog. He did not remember any porch lights, but he said the small homes nearby sometimes used helper bulbs that never slept. He also said staff from the facility used to walk to a bus stop at 4 in the morning after night shifts. The whisper could have been a staffer leaving alone, worried by a shape on the ramp. The theory fit and did no harm, and it honored the boundary between records and stories. Leora wrote a final entry into the training file, and she summarized the chain of evidence with careful language. She used reportedly, and dispatch logs and witness statements, and she added the laminated card as a scanned appendix. Before she closed it, she redialed the night number one last time to satisfy the part of her that wanted symmetry. The line clicked into a dead tone for 3 slow breaths, then released a single chime in silence. She sat still, then pressed stop and saved the recording with a title that matched her steady heart. She did not post about it, and she did not share more than the classroom frame. The work of nights is often this quiet, a puzzle solved just enough to let people sleep. On her drive home, she watched a porch light fade behind a tree line and let the road carry the rest away.